everyone. How are you doing? So as we talked last week, we're going to talk about some problems that happen during synchronization of ovulation protocols. And this week, it's a very special episode because I'm bringing a very good friend of mine. So this is Dr. Sebastian Umaña-Sedo. We met here at the University of Florida. We did our master's program together. We went to the farm together, did a lot of research. And actually, Sebastian is someone that has a lot of experience with luteolysis and follicular control in dairy heifers. Currently, he's a resident in University of Guelph. So he's living up north now in the cold now.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
Sebastian, thanks for accepting the invitation to talk with us today.
Sure, anytime, Kyle. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. So Sebastian, now I'm gonna share my screen. And so we already talked about this lengthily in the journal clubs and everything during our project separately. But this is the project. This is the protocol that we regularly use for dairy heifers, right? So this is the 5-day co-sync. And guys, we already talked about this protocol. And today we're going to talk about one problem that can happen in this protocol. So this protocol, just to remind you, first injection of GnRH for the cedar containing progesterone stays for 5 days. And then we give 2 injections of prostaglandins right after the cedar removal. And then day 0 is considered the day of insemination concomitantly with the GnRH injection. And that's what defines this protocol as the co-sync. So this is some data from one of my projects from 2020. And this refers to the proportion of heifers that expressed estrus, and we divided in different intervals. So here, 72 hours, as we saw, 3 days after the first prostaglandin injection is when we did timed insemination in these heifers. And these are the proportion of animals that expressed estrus or heat before the insemination. So we can see something very interesting that we have high proportions, 43%, 27% of animals that show estrus before day 0. And particularly for these animals, they're expressing estrus a lot early than what we want them to express. So this potentially cause an asynchrony between ovulation and the timing of insemination. And then this is going to affect pregnancy outcomes, at least for this service. So Sebastian, we already talked about this previously in another episode, but can you just go over just to remind us of the Astrocycle and what each injection is going to do in this cycle? And I'm going to add, yeah, you already have control, so the floor is yours.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Kyle. Let me see if I have control. Can you see me moving the mouse?
No, here. Now you can. Sorry. There you go.
There you go. So basically, when we give the first injection of GnRH, we're going to ideally induce the ovulation of a dominant follicle.
Yeah, up there.
And then we insert the cedar device. That's how we're going to increase the levels of progesterone that are associated with follicular growth. And by around day 5, we're going to remove the cedar and give 2 injections of prostaglandin within 24 hours. So what we're going to cause is either we're going to regress an old corpus luteum or the new corpus luteum that was formed in this ovulation.
Yes.
Why 2 prostaglandins? Because it's necessary to induce the ovulation of an early corpus luteum. And then around 72 hours after this, we're going to have animals in estrus. And we're going to ovulate our animals day
8.
Yeah.
Or 0, depends on what you use for reference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's how the protocol should work.
Yeah. So Sebastian, as I said, this is what I observed in my project. This is what I look into the literature. There are papers here from Florida in 2015, 2016, and they reported similar proportions of heifers that showed estrus one day before the timing of insemination. And then we know how long it takes from the estrus expression to ovulation, is around 28 hours. And then when we inseminate these animals, and then you take in consideration the optimal time of the oocyte quality, these animals are probably going to get inseminated really late compared to the estrus expression. So this is going to cause the synchrony that we talked before, and then pregnancy is going to be reduced. So why do you think that these animals express heat on day -1, for example?
Sure, yeah. What we don't want actually is cause that asynchrony. This is important. So we need these protocols to be, the follicular wave needs to be synchronized in order for the protocol to succeed. So big part of that expression of estrus before what we expect is because animals do not react to there is no ovulation after this injection of GnRH. So we're going to have a corpus luteum that is older. And at the time that we give the first prostaglandin injection, that corpus luteum might be regressing already, or it's going to be mature enough to regress with just an injection of prostaglandin. Therefore, they're going to cause that the levels of progesterone drop faster than we expected. And we also have a dominant follicle secreting estrogen. So those high levels of estrogen will cause the animals to get in heat, and then the surge of LH, then the ovulation in a very premature long way before we want to inseminate our heifers.
Makes sense. So what does, in your opinion, what does it make a heifer, for example, do not ovulate to the first GnRH?
So one of the concepts here is that dairy heifers has at least 3 or more follicular waves. That means that the chances that you, with the first injection of GnRH, induce the ovulation of a follicle that is larger than 10 millimeters are decreased. So that's why that might be an example of why this first GnRH doesn't have a great response in these protocols.
So if they are not responsive, is there do you think that the progesterone from this corpus luteum that they have at this point would affect like how they respond to GnRH? Because GnRH is gonna GnRH is gonna is gonna induce LH pulses, right? So I just read a couple of papers that they said progesterone affects the LH pulsatility and then the responsiveness. So yeah, I think you're right. And also high progesterone levels that when you give the GnRH reduces the responsiveness. So that's that may be a second reason why they don't ovulate at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another second reason for that.
So we know that this happens. It was widely published. And is there any way we can try to get around and fix and increase the responsiveness to the first GnRH injection?
Yeah, actually, there was a study made in 2018-19 from in the University of Florida, from Caracalla. And they use a dose of prostaglandin 2 days before the start of the synchronization protocol. So they have this control group with a 5-time AI protocol. That's this one over here, and the only difference was this injection of prostaglandin 2 days before. And that actually, what it does is increases the chances that your levels of progesterone decreases due to induced luteolysis of pre-existing corpus luteum. So the proportion of follicles that are going to be they're going to respond to GnRH is going to increase.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, in this paper or in this project, they show that. So when we go to see the results, the ovulation to GnRH in the to the first GnRH, that which one we have a very low response. We see that in control group that response was very low, but we're going to see to the group that was treated with a prostaglandin before the start of the synchronization protocol,
Mm-hmm.
have an increase in the proportion of animals that ovulated to the first injection of prostaglandin.
Uh-huh.
And with that said, you see that the ovulation before insemination did not occur, whereas in the control group, or the group that had a normal protocol, they had some proportion of animals that ovulated before, and that
Mm-hmm.
bring those problems that were associated with the fertility.
Mm-hmm.
And what you can see finally here is how when they give 2 days before that they gave the prostaglandin injection, when we give the GnRH, the concentration of progesterone in the control group, and in the group that was treated with prostaglandin compared to one that did not, and these concentrations are very low.
Mm-hmm.
There was there is no functional corpus luteum. There is no enough levels of progesterone to impair a surge of OLH that is necessary for ovulation.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in this group, it happened. You have these levels means that there was a functional corpus luteum.
So
And so
this goes.
the Mendo 5. Say that again.
So this goes with the theory that we were talking about, how progesterone alters the responsiveness to the GnRH, because then you see animals probably with the pre-existing corpus luteum. So we see that the day of GnRH, these animals have high progesterone, and the ones that were treated with prostaglandin don't, and then have greater proportion of responsiveness to the GnRH. So it's probably progesterone from pre-existing corpus luteum that is doing that, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then we see on day -3 that they actually get to have similar progesterone concentrations. So they match up in the end when you remove the CEDAR device. So that's interesting to see. But how does this, did it translate into any fertility change? Did it increase fertility or?
Yeah, actually it did. If you go to the practical outcome of this study was that the animals in the treatment group, they have an increased proportion of pregnancy at day 60 compared with the animals that were in the control group.
Mm-hmm.
It was a 20% different. So if you take that to large number of animals, it's very practically significant.
Yeah, that's really nice. I think, well, of course, I think more studies need to be done because that's just one, right? And they had a limited number of heifers. But I think a bigger study should be done to see if we can actually start applying that to farms, right? For dairy heifers, because we know the raising these heifers is expensive, and then we know that each time we inseminate these heifers and they don't get pregnant, it's probably 10, 15 days additional that we're just feeding them, and so they're gonna take additional days to get pregnant, to calve, and you're just delaying your the time to start getting your investment back on this animal, right?
Correct. Yeah.
But it's very interesting to see actually on that study that I showed that I published in 2020. We saw similar results. Of course, the purpose was not to do this treatment. We used the control group, so we did not pre-treat animals with prostaglandin 2 days prior to the initiation of the protocol. But it was really interesting to see how not just the GnRH responsiveness, that we didn't measure GnRH responsiveness, but we think that this is probably what happened, and low responsiveness to the GRH. But I think there are, well, of course, everything is multifactorial when you go to the farm biology. And I think that's another factor that drives this fertility response, this drop in fertility for the control group compared to the prostaglandin, is the follicular turnover, right? So they don't ovulate. So you're talking about a follicle that is older, and that's the follicle that is going to ovulate earlier for these animals that show heat prior to that. So it was very nice. Something that we did for that project that we published in 2020 is to compare the animals that were inseminated in heat on day -1, so 1 day prior to the synchronized insemination, and the animals that showed heat on day 0 and were inseminated on day 0. So the interval was equalized, and then we saw that even though these animals had reduced fertility, so animals that had heat on day 0 and were inseminated on day 0, the pregnancy for that service was 70%. And animals that showed heat on day -1 was 41%.
Mm-hmm.
So not only luteolysis happening in a time is important, but also if they don't ovulate to that first GnRH on day 0, they're gonna end up ovulating older oocytes, right? The follicles are they're older. So there's a study from Riva and Butler 1994 that they left CIDRs for 14 days in cows, and then they saw the impact on the oocyte, and then they saw that it had decreased fertility. Well, Sebastian, thank you very much for bringing all this nice information for us. Of course,
Sure.
it's very good to have new information, and then trying to improve protocols, and then of course increase fertility in animals. So I hope you're not getting too cold up there in Canada. And
Yeah.
and I appreciate you coming, and I hope you can come back and accept invitations in the future to talk about more subjects. So I know you're a specialist in hoof trimming, so I think we should do something in the future, talk about hoof trimming.
I wouldn't call myself a specialist on that, but yeah, for sure, it's an area that I'm very interested in. I worked for a long period of time, so anytime, Caio. Thank you very much.
There you go. So now you guys know, he already promised he's gonna come back and talk about hoof trimming for us.